Gamshi Lakwan, which in Kalapuya means what's up. Welcome to DiversiTV, the weekly interview show broadcast live from Lane Community College main campus. I am your host, Mark Harris. If you are new to DiversiTV, welcome. If you are part of our growing legion of fans, welcome back. Our mission, and we do accept it, is to illuminate everyday diversity issues and give the mic and the camera to those who don't always get it. This season, we've been looking at systems. So this season is our season 10. Each season roughly corresponds to LCC terms. So we've been looking at how systems respond to diversity in terms of that rubric, in terms of how LCC defines that, which encompasses quite a wide variety of topics. Tonight's show features author Henry Alley, who's a university professor, and I'll introduce him in a second. But just to do setup, this is a quote from Huey Newton, one of the founders of the Black Panther Party. "Homosexuals are not enemies of the people." And where he's coming from, because I was reminded of the poster for an upcoming event that's going to be June 5th, as we broadcast at Tsunami Books. The author, our guest tonight, is going to be reading and doing a book signing of his book. And one of the tags of the book is GLBT liberation. And so when I read that and reading some things from the book, I was reminded of Huey Newton, some of the things that he said. So I Googled the quote, where you basically, it's a search string. You just do Huey P. Newton, gay liberation. And here's what he said. During the past few years, strong movements, he's writing in 1970, strong movements have developed among women and among homosexuals seeking their liberation. There has been some uncertainty about how to relate to these movements. Whatever your personal opinions and your insecurities about homosexuality and the various liberation movements among homosexuals and women, and I speak of the homosexuals and women as oppressed groups, we should try and unite with them in a revolutionary fashion. We must gain security in ourselves and therefore have respect and feelings for all oppressed people. I do not remember ever consulting any value that said a revolutionary must say offensive things towards homosexuals, or that a revolutionary should make sure that women do not speak out about their own particular kinds of oppression. As a matter of fact, it's just the opposite. We say that we recognize the woman's right to be free. We have not said much about the homosexual at all, but we must relate to the homosexual movement because it is a real thing. And I know through reading and through my life experience and observations that homosexuals are not given freedom and liberty by anyone in society. They might be the most oppressed people in the society. But the Women's Liberation Front and Gay Liberation Front are our friends, they are our potential allies, and we need as many allies as possible. Because of the long conditioning process, which builds insecurity in the American male, homosexuality might produce certain hang-ups in us. I have hang-ups myself about male homosexuality, but on the other hand, I have no hang-up about female homosexuality, and that is a phenomenon in itself. I think it is probably because male homosexuality is a threat to me and female homosexuality is not. We should try and form a working coalition with the gay liberation and women's liberation groups. We must always handle social forces in the most appropriate manner. Henry Alley wrote a book called Precincts of Light, a novel set against the background of the Measure 9 crisis, which was an anti-gay measure in the 1990s here in Oregon. A newly out brother and sister try to recover the lost affections of their children. Explored from 5 points of view, including a closeted member of the Anti-Gay Alliance, pushing the measure. The novel is a story of the American family coming to new terms with itself. This is a poster about the upcoming event at Tsunami Books, June 5th, 5 p.m. Signing and reading at Tsunami. Available at Tsunami, Amazon.com, Powell's, Barnes & Noble. Novel by Precincts of Light, a novel by Henry Alley about GLBT liberation and Oregon's Measure 9 crisis. Our guest tonight, Henry Alley from the University of Oregon. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Where are you from?
I'm originally from Seattle, but I've lived all over the country.
Okay.
Yeah.
How long have you been at the U of O? How did you come to Eugene?
I came to Eugene because I was attracted to the program in the Honors College, and I came in 1982. So
Okay. Wow.
I've been here 28 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite a piece of time.
It has been, yes.
So as an author of, so I guess let's start off with what Ballot Measure 9 was.
Okay,
And might be again, you know, because the forces that created it have not disappeared.
Right. The ballot is defined in the book, and I'm glad it has, because back in 1992, of course, everyone knew what it was, and I actually had a reading of an earlier version of this book in 94, and I didn't have to explain it, but now it's somewhat it's seen as ancient history. So I'll read this part in it. The measure, which would amend the state constitution and ban all funds for anything even remotely gay or lesbian, also outlined any positive presentation of that lifestyle in public schools and colleges. In fact, the institutions by mandate, quote, shall assist in setting a standard for Oregon's youth that recognizes homosexuality, pedophilia, sadism, and masochism as abnormal, wrong, unnatural, and perverse, and that these behaviors are to be discouraged and avoided, unquote.
Okay. Okay.
Pretty strong language.
Yes. And, you know, when we look at, because now remembering back in context what that happened and my particular discipline within that, within ethnic studies, that would mean then that I would not be allowed to talk about James Baldwin,
right.
Angela Davis, the Harlem Renaissance, Langston Hughes, et cetera, in any positive light, which is similar, and it's not really paranoid to talk about this because Arizona just banned ethnic studies. Mm. Okay? Mm-hmm. Any kind of ethnic studies. Right. So, you know, the notion in terms of looking at that, and that's why I had to start, you know, with Huey Newton, because let's put this in context here. Okay?
Yeah, there was a force writing out there that was trying to stop any kind of positive framing of lesbian and gay experience, and so it was lumped with criminal, identifiably criminal acts. But that could be applied to any group that was not on the mainstream, or not within the mainstream.
Has been really.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of our earlier guests, as I was telling you before we went on camera, one of the things we've been looking at this season, one of our earlier guests, a young black male, gay male writer, basically had been writing kind of in his own lights callously about mental illness. And so I shared with him DSM. And one of the things that he looked at under the category of gender identity dysphoria was, he said, wow, this is like right after pedophilia. I said, yeah, right. Notice that. Okay? Because, again, he says, so what is this about? So is this saying that gay people are crazy? Is it? No, it's saying that, well, it used to say that it was deviance and a form of mental illness, bad, bad, bad. Now it's not saying, now it's part of human sexual diversity, if you will, to put the most positive spin on it. But notice that it doesn't say what a healthy gay identity is.
Yeah, there's still an attempt, I think, to make it clinical.
Yes.
Make it a clinicized condition.
Right.
And one of the things I tried to do in the book was to make the people, the gay and lesbian people, actually individuals.
Yes.
So that the reader could identify with them as human beings rather than some kind of lumped category, the way what I call the Oregon Protection Alliance was lumping them as a category. And I think that literature and fiction, poetry, drama do that, do us a favor, because they stop getting that category as predominant and actually make them into a group of, make them into human beings.
Yeah, human beings and individuals.
Yes.
Without so much a suspension of disbelief, it kind of makes it actually more real. Because even though it is fiction,
yes,
it's still, you know, you're writing what you know, so to speak, and it is more real.
Right. I tried to take a group of what I would call composite characters, characters that you could actually see as people in your own life, and make them individuals within this context of 1992. You know, that's something that would take you back and make them very, very much real, you know.
Yeah. So within within the academy, then, how, because you're
Yeah.
at the U of O,
Right.
right?
Right.
What kind of currency do you find these ideas have?
Well, I teach a literature course,
Okay.
literature by and about gay men.
Okay.
Now, if this particular measure had passed, I would actually be banned
Yeah.
from actually presenting
Right.
that course. And the course has meant a great deal to me. I've taught it for a number of years. And I tell my class, this is a kind of course that when I was in graduate school, I never thought I would live long enough to teach. Because back then, you know, we were really not talking about gay studies. I mean, there was
Right.
no such term.
No.
And the works themselves that referred to things gay were still seen as highly, highly marginal. So there's been a movement counter to these movements to oppress us that's actually brought it to the fore. So when you get something like Measure 9, it's an attempt to take us backwards. And one of the reasons I wrote this book, I wrote it over a long, long period of time, but one of the reasons I wrote this book was to kind of extend that forward motion,
Yeah.
to create another book,
Yeah.
which would move us in that direction.
Is that was your writing in process now?
The writing right now that I'm doing is doing that. This book I started in 1985, and actually, you know, was working with it over a course of 25 years. I wrote other novels.
Yeah.
It's not the only thing I wrote.
Yeah, right. No,
but it took that time to construct it in such a way where I was finally satisfied with it.
Yeah, I actually Googled your book list. So, I mean, it is quite extensive. So, and the body of work, you know, definitely stands on its own. What changes have you seen over your lifespan? I know you want to talk about the book, and we can talk about it. What changes have you seen over your lifespan, and what changes would you like to see in terms of like basic human rights?
I think that the whole idea of being gay and being out was something that was completely foreign when I was growing up. Now, you understand I was growing up mainly in the 1950s.
Yes.
And
Right.
the word queer was about the worst thing that you could call anybody.
Right.
So the idea that somebody could say, I'm gay, and also I'm a father, or I'm lesbian, and I'm a mother, or I'm a wife, I'm a husband, and move forward with that, be open about it, but have a full life was completely odd. Completely odd. And also, there were really, really strict concepts, much stricter than now, about what it meant to be a man and what it meant to be a woman. And one time I went into the library of our high school, and I pulled out a health book. And I was looking through it, and it had an ink blot on there.
Rorschach?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that, anyway. And I looked at it, and it said in the book, a boy, if he looks at this shape, will undoubtedly see a ship. And if a girl looks at this shape, she will undoubtedly see a dress. And I looked at that, and I thought,
okay.
I not only saw a dress, I saw a gown. I saw, you know, a Cinderella type gown with big poofy sleeves. And I thought, boy, am I in trouble. And all that, too, of having gay feelings in that particular time period, late 50s, early 60s, was like seeing, you know, Christmas constantly in June, seeing things that other people did not see. So that kind of Alice in Wonderland effect gradually dissipated somewhat over time with Stonewall and other important events for gay and lesbian, transgender, bisexual people. But I still think we're moving, we still have ways to go.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, I was asked this question not long ago, do I think that we're really past having a problem with people coming out? And I'll say, no, we're not past it. It's still ongoing.
Not even close.
And I've said, you know, it depends on where you are, a lot of it, you know. So I was at a gay lesbian writers conference a few years back, and they said, well, that topic coming out is passé. And I said, it's not passé, particularly if you're talking about being in some place rural, someplace
right.
away from New
Right.
York City or Los
Right.
Angeles or
Right.
Hollywood.
Or the urban centers. I mean, that's
Yes.
one of the things that
Yes.
we were talking about earlier in one of the earlier shows.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reading list from a black female writer talking about, okay, in slavery, I mean, because again,
Yes.
a client today, white 20-something gay male client was just basically saying, look, Stonewall, what's that? I don't even relate to that. And he said, I don't relate to, being pigeonholed by who I sleep with. I'm more than that. Well, yes, that's true, right? Well, I'm more than my excellent suntan, too, and I'm more than slavery, and I'm more than the civil rights movement. But, this female writer was talking about, okay, gay liberation in the black community was not able to happen in slavery because we were all objects, and then the first time that we could come out, as it were, was in cities, was in artistic movements. So you start seeing the Harlem Renaissance and the 40s thing and what Huey was talking about, in nascent forms. So I want you to bring out that whole Stonewall piece because, we're of a certain age where, okay, that happened during our lifespan, and people born since then, that's not a referent from them.
Okay. Well, Stonewall happened in New York at the Stonewall Bar in 1969, and some people may know that the police habitually, not just in New York, but throughout the country, would categorically go into bars and the gay bars and rough the people up. And in Stonewall, this was a pattern also, even though the bar had habitually paid the police off for protection. Right. But when they came by to rough them up on that particular night in June in 1969, suddenly, particularly the drag queens fought back. And it was an extraordinary moment because the gay, lesbian, transgendered, bisexual people did not take it lying down. Not that they had taken it lying down before, because there were an enormous number of heroic, sometimes anonymously heroic acts that had led up to that event throughout the country. But it was the most dramatic. And the riots went on for several days. And since that time, particularly in June, there will be gay liberation parades and marches to commemorate that particular moment. So, and we need to add too that there were things feeding that moment, such as black liberation. I mean, because they cued off the black movement. They cued off the anti-Vietnam movement. So it was the right moment in time.
The timing, is kind of indicative of what's going on. Because also when we're talking about, for example, the American Psychological Association piece, that didn't happen until '73.
Right.
All right. So the reason the police were able to do those raids is because, your sexuality was essentially against the law. Right. Just like being black on the street, in Eugene. Was against the law during that same time period we're talking about. Well,
that's why I would say, that the forward movement that I mentioned away from the late 50s and the early 60s was so far advanced by events like Stonewall and was advanced further on by things like fighting Measure 9. And one of the interesting things about Measure 9 was it not only brought a lot of people out of the closet in terms of being lesbian, gay, transgendered, bisexual, but it also brought a lot of advocates out of the closet too. So it was a liberating movement in a variety of ways, just as a Stonewall event was too. Yeah.
So in terms of looking at that liberation piece, so again, trying to get the point across. Yes. Look, people are being oppressed. I mean, Huey Newton's saying that.
Right.
You're having to pay off police, and to stop raids and stuff like that, and have either laws passed or whatever. And a lot of younger folks. I mean, they can look back to Matthew Shepard. Okay, you're getting attacked for your immutable characteristic.
Yes.
Okay, you know, even the choice of language between preference and orientation, and
Right.
all those other little subtle consciousness cues.
I might just add,
Yeah.
as a parenthesis here, that the book addresses Measure 8 as well, which was a
Right.
prelude to Measure 9. And in
How is it different?
Measure 8 was to undercut a guarantee that the governor had made that people, state employees, would not be discriminated against on the basis of their orientation.
Okay.
So that was a safeguard which Measure 8, it won, and it undercut that safeguard, and it was a really, really disappointing defeat. But out of that defeat, which occurred, I believe, in 1988, came the movement and the strength to fight Measure 9. And another aspect of Measure 8 was that eventually an employee working for the University of Oregon, with the help of the ACLU, went and got it thrown out through the Supreme Court of Oregon.
Thus guaranteeing partner benefits.
Yes.
Yeah.
All of those things
Yeah.
came through.
Yeah. So again, this is a civil rights issue.
Right. It is.
Yeah. Civil rights, human rights issue. You want to read an excerpt from the book?
Sure. The one I thought of reading has to do with a parade, and there's a sense of exaltation as this rally develops, and it's from the point of view of the character Harold, who is a minister working to come out.
Okay.
So I'll just take a minute or two to describe this sense of exaltation, and also his mother, Eleanor, is exalted as a mother who's coming out supporting her son and actually her daughter as well. Harold's sermon got finished on the Saturday before Columbus Day. Was the last rally just a year ago, he wondered? It seemed a millennium. This time they had a No on 9 banner which they marched down the center of Arden against all orders over to the 1950s part of town, around and around the Arden Balboa Inn as a picket, where Samuel was rumored to be showing up, and then back to the Renaissance Fair before joining their affiliates up in Capital City. Monday night they were to have their No on 9 benefit concert at the Arden Dome. Their father, in fact, was still in Washington, D.C., trying to nail down some particulars on it. They assembled under the awnings of the building, which had all the copper emblems. In Isabella Circle, because they were blocked from Columbus Square. Through the light, they were watching a TV set in the lobby. There's the ad for the Oregon Protection Alliance. In this ad, 2 boys were waiting to be placed with their adoptive parents, who turned out to be 2 gay men. "But where's our mother?" one of the boys asked near tears. "She's not there. Deal with it," Derek said on the side. "Don't let this happen to Oregon. Vote yes on 9, the ad went on. A hiss went up. Harold could scarcely hear the dialogue, but knew what it said. He had seen it, read about it so many times before. And so the cheer went up, and he waved to the onlookers. Derek tossed dahlias. "Yes, that's right," he answered. They had gained sight of the river. Blue herons flapped up out of the water and Rodin-like shadows. Their wings were the same colors of the clouds. Someone switched on I Am What I Am, Gloria Gaynor. They had a phalanx of dancers briefly attired. The unison of their muscles was intoxicating. What a distance from that time, not long ago, he had tried to dance with a man of the fair and had gotten into a fight. At last, he had stopped apologizing.
When I think about when I was reading the book Arden, of course, I was thinking, okay, this is like Eugene, like a tree city, except Eugene doesn't have a dome, but that's a reference to Seattle and the Renaissance Fair, and right. When you talk about the closeted man who's in the Oregon Citizens Alliance, right. That's a real phenomenon. You don't have to name or out someone, but that's a real phenomenon, right? And that's what I found in terms of making it real for myself, reading the book, in terms of, these are actual folks going through actual struggles.
Yes.
Get inside can you explicate the mind of that character who's in the Protection Alliance, and what's the math on that?
Yeah. Well, Samuel is a is a character who is very much into power, and he has a lot of creativity, which I see in myself and in a lot of other people, but it gets turned in a particular bent direction because of his desire for opportunism. And so Samuel is somebody who can pay lip service to liberal causes and so forth and use them as ways of getting a lot of power. But if it comes to the problem of making himself vulnerable, he's not willing to do that. And I feel that that's what the coming out process involves. It involves a certain amount of vulnerability, a certain willingness to join the human race, you know, to be a sexual being. And he doesn't want to give that up. Now, technically in the book, I wouldn't call him gay or a closeted gay, but I call him somebody who wants to go beyond the limits of the gender that he's assigned to himself.
Okay.
You know, I mean, even to the point of wanting to go in and try on women's clothes, which happens in the book. But that, what I would call internalized homophobia, is something that can make, at least from what I can see in myself and I can see in other people, can make some people very, very much fanatical in the issue of going in the opposite direction.
Yeah, right.
Yes,
yeah, right.
Because it's a threat. It's a threat to their lives to have openly happy gay and lesbian people around. They are not themselves. And so there's this element of the book of having so much envy that, and so much anger towards oneself that they turn in the direction and form that affiliation. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, and it does produce interesting effects. So, you know, just to, well, I can name names because he's a public figure, and I'm not sure that he relates to that particular character, but well, this will be controversial, and I guess I can allow it to be what it is, because it is a real quote. The Klan, basically, there's going to be an N-bomb coming, folks, so strap your seatbelt. This is a Ku Klux Klan quote. They were against niggers, Jews, communists, Catholics, homosexuals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? And there had been an element of that within the Oregon Citizens Alliance. And one of the things we see in Scott Lively, right, going over to Uganda, and, you know, all of a sudden I didn't really notice that there was a whole anti-gay movement in Uganda until, which is basically, oh, we're killing people, we're, you know, doing this, that, and the other, even in a way that we don't do. I mean, we had done that here in the United States, but in Africa they've taken it to a whole extreme, almost as, you know, bad as the Nazis. So not death camps, but pretty close to open murders, unprotected, you know, violence, et cetera, and, you know, that he's been stirring that up.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, where I cannot really say, you know, you cannot divorce the racism and the homophobia. It's there. I mean, the Klan put it out there as who they're with and what it is to be an American, and black people and homosexuals are not real Americans, and so combining those interests and taking them elsewhere. I see that as a logical thing. What is this, envy? Is this, you know, people being themselves, and you're opposed to that? What is that going?
Well, I would actually also like to cue off a little bit of what Huey Newton said, and this is not altogether positive about what he said. So
yeah, right.
That's okay.
No, it's cool.
But he said, though, he was particularly threatened by gay men being with gay men. Right? He called them homosexual.
Right.
That, to me, is very, very illuminating, because actually, when I was back campaigning against Measure 9, against the Oregon Citizens Alliance, I noticed, when I was even looking at the kind of hate material they were putting out, I noticed that very, very little was said about lesbians. Very little. I mean, they would, in their general material, they would lump everybody together, but I just noticed that the hate material really centered in, and this is actually in the book too, centered in on gay men. And I think it was because, just like Huey Newton said, he didn't have any trouble imagining women together.
Right.
but he had trouble imagining gay men together.
Right.
And I think that one of the things that comes up, I don't mean necessarily for Huey Newton, but I mean in the men that actually go out and militate against other gay men, is that they can't stand to have their power structure threatened.
Mm-hmm.
Their idea, and I saw this again in the Oregon Citizens Alliance repeatedly, that the idea of two men being together, loving towards each other, threatened their concept of men dominating over women, and that it came back more to an issue about power and gender more than it did about the issue of orientation. So, and I think that's one of the reasons why they weren't particularly threatened by seeing two women together, because it didn't threaten that male.
Yeah.
Because
they're still women.
Yes,
right? Yeah.
that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And in a power where, in a context where male power still dominates women, two women together, either let's see, what do they call it? The Heather Has Two Mommies, a book that attracted their ire, and then the corresponding book for men,
right, Daddy's Roommate.
Right. Thanks. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, the thing that I found, in terms, because it's Huey and it's 1970s, and it's like, okay, he at least talks about it.
He does,
without really interrogating the dynamic of where that came from.
Right.
I mean, he's not. I mean, was a brilliant cat, but that still does not necessarily translate into enlightened social policy in terms of liberation.
Right.
So, when your book talks about liberation, I mean, and it's fiction, it's not exactly a manifesto.
Right, no. And I didn't want to write that. I wanted to write...
Was that a marketing tool for somebody else?
Well, no. As far as it being on the actual packaging of the novel, I think it's very hard to come up with something that's really concentrated, that's really, a sound bite that really works. And I suppose I could have put on the book, it's an attempt to present, a progressive sequence of psychological portraits in relationship to political pressure, but it didn't quite have the soundbite.
Right.
But that's really what I was after.
Yeah.
But because it isn't really a manifesto, what it is more it's showing how a particular point in time with political resonances actually opened up people's psyches in a way that I thought was unusual and I thought was appealing. And also, there's the collection of 5 different points of view in the piece created for me a kind of rainbow effect that I really wanted. I wanted each of the voices to contrast with the others, so there was a variety in the work, as well as a sense that each piece had its own particular flavor.
So what do you think are some of the thorny issues to be worked out? And I mean, it's not a manifesto, but what do you think of some of the thorny issues that you work out in the book? And if you want to do an excerpt that illustrates that, that's okay.
Well, I think one of the reasons it took so long to write was because I wanted the character, the wild card character, Samuel, to have a certain amount of resonance along with Eleanor, the mother, and Harold, the son, and Joanne, the daughter, and Appleton, the father figure. I wanted them all to fit in together.
These are archetypes, to use that term.
But I wanted him to have a certain amount of cogency, because the authors that I really admire, even though you have a character who is definitely a part of the dark, the part of the negative forces in the work, is somebody that you can understand. Is not just a store-bought villain.
Right.
So the thorny issue, it seemed to me in the book, well, there are two thorny issues that immediately come to mind for me, and one of them is that he has, in being a part more of the mainstream, has a certain amount of power, and so he can assure a certain amount of protection for his daughter that's, at least on the surface, much more appealing than what his ex-wife.
Daughter?
He has a lesbian wife.
Yes. Okay.
And so she's a part of a kind of an avant-garde movement. And at least on the surface, she appears not to offer the same sort of security that he can offer, just point blank. And so one of the thorny issues is, at least for me, is how does one move against the social current and still provide a sense of security for one's children or for whoever is dependent on one, you know. So that's one thorny issue. Another thorny issue is that for me, diversity is not just throwing out everything in the past and coming up with only things that are current. You know, and sometimes I feel like in the name of diversity, you know, great writers and so forth are kind of just tossed. And so the book makes an appeal to hold on to the past as well as to get beyond it. It's a question not of past being less than the more current. It's a question of what in the past you want to hold on to and what in the past you don't want. You know what I'm saying? You know, you don't want...
Can you talk about that more?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want in the past the police raids of going around and just categorically roughing up people because they're different, whether they're black or white or lesbian or gay. But on the other hand, I don't necessarily think, you know, Plato ought to be thrown out as a work of philosophy simply because, you know, we can't identify immediately a whole lot of minorities in Plato's work. So that issue is addressed. It's not the major issue in the book, but it's one of the thornier pieces I wanted to bring in there, so it wasn't just kind of like a manifesto, categorically just to hold up a banner and move forward. I mean, I think that we're moving forward, but in some ways I feel we have to look to the past for a certain amount of guidance, if that makes sense.
Yes. So I guess which parts of the past then should be carried forward and brought to policy now? Policy or practice? Because I get down to... All right, so we don't have police raids of gay bars. Right. Actually, in Eugene, we have, and I don't know if we even have gay bars anymore. But you know, okay, snafu. But you know, because I'm asking, you know, the kids, and I'm a drug counselor, so you know, there had been an issue in the prevention world of, okay, we want to prevent gay teen suicide, and we want role models that are not part of the bar scene.
Yes,
because you know, because of that problematic piece, you know, and we also want people, you know, to, you know, safer sex, et cetera, because the whole thing with gay men's health crisis, you know, getting out in front of HIV and STDs and creating the climate for everyone in terms of, you know, having that awareness, right, of health in general for everyone, right. Not just being an oppressed minority. So that's one part of the past that, you know, I think, let's talk about that and become more conscious with it. But what does a healthy role model look like? Is it Socrates? Is it, who is it?
Well, you know, I don't have, you know, an instant answer for what has been a continuous problem for centuries, but I do have a few ideas. And one thing that, I mean, in continuing our look at gay lesbian liberation from all the way back when people were, you know, categorically roughed up, all the way through Stonewall, all the way through the 70s, and then when you know, the DSM, was it DSM 3? Where we finally
3 and 73.
We threw it out. Interesting, just a little bit of a story on that. One man said that when that happened, when it was no longer seen as clinically identifiably wrong to be gay, he said he went to bed abnormal one night and the next morning he got up and he was normal because they changed the handbook. But anyway, but if we move that spectrum forward with the advent of AIDS, it was clear to me, and I was out at that time, that gay men thought they could no longer be in isolation. It wasn't just enough to go and dance in the dance bars. They had to group together again. And there was some of that movement of having...
Group together and do what?
Okay. Rap groups, for example. That in the 80s, you started to see the rap groups. They get together and talk about issues such as intimacy, such as how do you make friends, such as coping with loneliness. And I was very much a part of that group. How do you participate as a member of a church? That was something. Another question that came out. Could you have gay spiritual groups? There had been all along, but these things came to the fore. Gay athletics, you suddenly had front runners, gay, lesbian, transgendered, bisexual people being positive about their bodies and showing up at various events. I was at the Gay Games both in 1990 in Vancouver, British Columbia, and also in Holland in 1998. And it was just like seeing this kind of global experience of being positive about being gay without having to have, the shelter of the bar, or darkness, or shame, or whatever was associated with that. And also being very open about safe sex, and I think that was something that happened in the 80s, that people had to talk openly about those issues, particularly who were part of the gay male scene, or else they weren't going to survive. So that's I think, and then there were role models without question. I mean, they could be found at the Gay Games, they could be found in the gay writers groups, they could be found in the rap groups, because invariably, at least the rap groups that I attended had a wide variety of ages.
And you besides Gay Games and things like that, you started seeing expressions in quote unquote popular culture. So like long time companion.
Yes. Right.
Where because the A&D the addictions connection for me, one of the things I talk about. Just look, this is a global transmission. It's a heterosexual disease. It just, when you talk about Advent, how we noticed it in this country was among gay men first. Okay? So when you start countering the rhetoric about, oh, well, this is God's way of punishing, blah, 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 and then I counter with, okay, well, there are more heterosexual people in Africa, so is God punishing black people? Because that ain't flying. So let's take that out and let's look at the virus don't care what you are. It's just looking for a home. So let's talk about, let's take a lesson from what happened in this community, how they had to organize around their own self-interest because they were oppressed, they were being marginalized, and they said, okay, we ain't getting help, the cavalry ain't coming to help us, we need to help ourselves, and let's take those practices. So when you start seeing long-time companion, right, and then I have friends that were long-term survivors, right, and 20 or 30 years, right? And so, like what happens within that community, and then
you have something like Angels in America, which is like kind of on an epic scale presenting homophobia in its various layers that existed in the Reagan era. And queuing off of that, what can we do to be more positive about how we feel and how we treat not only other people but treat ourselves? I mean, which is also central. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, treating ourselves, because I mean, again, because I have to go to. All right, we go from police beatings to prosecuting Matthew Shepard's attackers, right, and then looking at protections, and then we start seeing that violence morphing to other groups, like in our town, the killing and beating up of homeless folks, vulnerable others, right? How do we treat and care for those who have been marginalized?
Right. And again, I think that the role of literature in that is that it can make all of those groups of people into individuals by taking one particular point of view and developing that forward and giving them a voice, making them a person rather than just a simple category.
Fiction is a great tool for practicing how to think about these things. I like that. So if you're going to shape a healthy way to have a positive identity amidst social oppression, how would you begin to do that?
Well, for one thing, I mean, you want to, visiting the whole issue of addiction in the book. There is a young man named Derek in the book who is he's a high schooler who is very, very much out. And he is gay bashed in the course of the story, and that's actually where the first part of that story I'm going to be reading at the Tsunami reading. But he's gay bashed, but he also retreats from all of the buffets that he's been getting by taking pills, by drinking, by getting drunk.
Self-medicating,
self-medicating and forming this shell. In the course of the book, he goes into recovery. He finds...
In high school?
Yes, yes. He goes into recovery.
Thanks for doing that.
And he eventually comes out all over again. So because the book makes a statement that it would be one thing for him to be out, loaded, but it's an altogether different thing to be out and to be clean and sober as he is. And he struggles. He struggles a lot.
Because the attacks still happen.
Yes. And they happen with his stepfather, you know, whose church is firebombed and graffiti is put on it. So, yeah, at the same time. So that's one thing that can happen. Your question again was how we form...
Positive identity. And, okay, so keying off of that, right? So he's self-medicating, gets into recovery, still is, you know, goes through the coming out process again, is attacked, stepfather's church is firebombed for harboring, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just the internal person of the person with the orientation or who's targeted, it's the support system around them. How do they wrap their minds around, how do I support my child?
Well, one thing is that his stepfather learns to be more honest with him about his own struggles. And that's, I think that's something that can lead to a more positive identity. That he wasn't, his stepfather stops trying to put himself up on a pedestal. He still tries to be father to him, but he's also trying to present an image of someone who is human as a father rather than someone who is perfect as a father. And so, despite the fact, I mean, both of them are gay, so that helps, I guess. But even without that commonality, I think it would be very possible for them to have a positive relationship and for Derek to find the role model that he truly wants in his father, which he is. The book does not end with a whole package of resolutions, but it's leading toward that. But
no Hollywood ending.
No, and the same is true for Joanne and her daughter. Her daughter is not necessarily lesbian, but her daughter has come to understand that her mother is willing to own up to the fact that she made some mistakes in her coming out process. So she's with her mother now. She understands her mother. She's formed a true connection with her, but she doesn't expect her mother to be perfect. And I think that that's another thing that can happen in formation of, you know, in kind of abstracting that from the book and the formation of positive role models, positive relationships.
What I like to go to in terms of looking at in you know the major pitfalls, the common mistakes, because when you talk about, there's a difference between a stereotype and an archetype, right? So an archetype comes from within the culture, and it's like an exemplar, you know, an example of what to be, and a stereotype is viewed from outside the culture, and usually in a negative context. So Derek and his stepfather, both being gay, you know, stepdad going through his own process, different process, and the mom making her own mistakes. What are some of the classic mistakes?
Well, for one thing, the stepfather gets drunk at one point. It's not a very good model. I mean, for someone, and he owns up to that. He owns up to that was a mistake. The father himself is not an alcoholic, but that it's and Derek speaks up about it. He said, "This is no place that I want to live in with that kind of thing happening." So that's one classic mistake. A classic mistake that Joanne made with Sonia was that she was in a gay pride parade, and she lost sight of Sonia. Sonia was lost for a little bit because her mother was so caught up in the parade, the fervor of it. And you know, these are things that are not typical of Joanne and Harold, because they're very basically good people, but there are mistakes that they made with their children, and I think the point is that they owned up to that. And want to steer their lives in a different direction away from that at the same time.
If you will, it's they're both forms of intoxication.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one is a substance which you're using to drown your sorrows in the face of very powerful emotions, which, okay, you could just like go through those emotions and find a way to, you know, either do ceremony or some kind of way that contains those emotions and expresses them fully in a healthy way. Or, and the other intoxication is ego intoxication, where you're carried away by fervor and you don't see your kid.
Right, exactly, yeah. And there's a delicate balance in the book that's being worked with, and that is that people in the book need a group. They need a sense of communal experience. But on the other hand, they really need to be themselves at the same time, and that's a balance that's constantly shifting throughout the book. And for Joanne, you know, she knew that she could have been more herself and more a mother at some points when she was getting caught up in the whole experience of being liberated in the group, you know. And to some extent that was true for Harold as well. He got thrilled with the idea of being able to dance openly with another man, you know, but then he didn't stop to think if he came home drunk what impact that would be on his son who was struggling to be in recovery. So there are pitfalls everywhere, you know, as the book moves along, but the characters, I love the characters. I love how they struggle, and I've felt a commitment to the characters to get them out, and they all try to live in a way that's what they would call a way of integrity for themselves. So that happens as well.
So Tsunami on Saturday. Where do you go from here? Book tour or?
Oh, I think at this point I may try to take it up more to like Portland and get it out, but again in a small way, and then see from there, and then work on some of the other books that I've actually written in this 25-year process. So there's a lot going on, and I'm kind of just waiting for the next indicator.
What would be your advice if you were into giving advice for parents, grandparents, and children?
In this
context,
for this particular issue?
Yeah.
Well, I guess just keeping an open mind, you know, and keeping a sense of, well, maybe this could be myself, you know. And that's something that the book attempts to do. It's a crossover novel in the sense that it's made to appeal to LGBT people, but it's also meant to appeal to the people who are connected to them in terms of family, in terms of friends, in terms of associates, and so that's the thing, is perhaps to try to identify with another particular point of view.
Yeah, I mean, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Let's see. This might be too deep for the time that we have, but we can make a stab at it.
Okay.
You talked about gender assignments.
Yes.
All right. And we're both instructors, so that's not exactly like it's something you can write down.
Right.
Can you talk about that, and in the context of, say, heteronormative? What is a gender assignment?
You mean gender assignment in terms of having a stereotype associated with it? Well, for me, back in the 50s, there was a certain dictum coming down that, you know, boys did this and girls did this.
Right. And that's heteronormative, you know, saying, and who's defining what normal is? Boys do this and girls do this.
Or boys see things this way and girls see things this
Battleship versus gown.
Battleship versus gown. So I can remember being discouraged when I was offered the opportunity to buying a gift for myself at the birthday of something that was involved, I think, making something out of clay and putting sparkly stuff over it. Well, no, that's not what you want to do, because that's what girls do. They like to put sparkly things on things. Probably would be better if you got a little battleship that way. So I think that the way around that, again, is the same thing that I mentioned before, of having an open mind about, well, not only what somebody else might choose, but what are the kinds of assumptions I have when I want a child of mine to buy a battleship rather than something that's sparkly if my child turns out to be a boy.
Yeah.
Or what kind of assumptions do I have? And maybe parents don't have this anymore, and that's wonderful if we've gotten that far along. But
well, at least they should ask themselves the question about why I'm doing that question.
Yeah, exactly. Or have a daughter who wants to buy a football. I mean, those kinds of things I think are raised in the book, and I think that that's something that I would hope that they could be led to.
The book is Precincts of Light. The reading is at Tsunami Books, June 5th. Our author is Henry Alley.
Right.
I want to thank you for coming
Thank
tonight.
you for having me. I've enjoyed this.
If you like what you've seen, tell a friend about this show and email us at liveclass@lanecc.edu. Put DiversiTV in the subject line. Tell us what you liked. Tell us what you'd like to see in the future. Go well. Stay well.